Again, welcome everyone. It's so good to have you here. This is the morning Dharma talk presentation. We will have Mokuo and Sangaku from the Falmouth Soto Zen Sangha giving a presentation on their Women Ancestor project. And before we begin that, I would just like to ask, are there any questions about administration, accessing materials, things like that? Nope. Okay, great. Then we would like to proceed with the Dharma opening verse. So Hojo, there's your cue for the bell. Unmute so we can hear the bell.
The unsurpassed,
profound, wondrous Dharma
is rarely
met with
even in 100,000
million
kalpas.
kalpas.
Now we can
see and hear it,
accept and
maintain it.
May we
unfold
the meaning of the Tathagata's truth. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see everyone, and I'm happy to be here. I'm happy you're here. So my topic today is we wanted to introduce this project that our Sangha has initiated with the help of others, and it's the Women's Ancestor project. And before I go into it, I would just like to say a few thank yous. I'd like to say thank you to Hojo for his leadership. I'd like to say thank you to the tech crew, Cosettes and Pusat. Without them, we wouldn't be here. I'd like to say thank you to my sensei and guiding teacher, Sensei Sangaku. And I'd like to mention gratitude towards just a few authors and translators, because without the writers and the translators, the project wouldn't exist. So they would be Caroline Rice-David, translator, Charles Hallisey, Grace Shearshin, Susan Murcott, Wendy Garling, Florence Kaplow, and Susan Moon. Of course, there are many others, but I just wanted to mention those. We began the project about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, while I was studying to be a disciple. It's a collaborative project. And although the Falmouth Soto Zen Sangha spearheaded it, these are the women that have been participating. And Kua-san has been from Montana, is a collaborator. Maya Sho Nancy Blanton from Canada is a collaborator. Amy Wilson from Falmouth, Julie Bannister from Falmouth, and myself. Okay. So how did this come about? So a few years ago, actually, in our Falmouth book club, we started to study the book, The Hidden Lamp by Kaplow and Moon. And that is, I'm sure you know what it is, but just in case you don't, it's a collection of historical koans and stories of awakened women. And then there is a commentary to those koans by contemporary Buddhist practitioners and scholars. And so this was my first introduction to a group of women. And I was really amazed, actually, at all the women, contemporary women, that most of them I had never heard of. So that was an inkling that there were more women than there were in our Sangha. So the next deep dive that happened for me, as studying as for a disciple, I did read different texts. And quite frankly, it was a little overwhelming for me. I'm a slow reader. But I happened to go to the Upaya Zen Center via Zoom during COVID. And they had a weekend for women, a women's weekend. And all these women spoke, these longtime practitioners who have studied the Dharma and who teach and who write and do all sorts of things, spoke. And it really, I could identify with everything that they said. I could identify. And that's, I got a sense of belonging. And I think that we all need that. I need that. I need a sense, well, where do I fit into this picture? And I felt like I finally fit in. And I'm sure that isn't true for everyone, but for me, it spoke to deep parts of me. They talked about all kinds of different things. And during that weekend, they talked about depression. This one writer talked about, well, maybe she can finish this book if she can get through her depression. And of course, they talked about relationships and children and cooking, having to cook dinner every night. And those are the things that I can relate to, as well as more esoteric stuff about the Dharma. So what impressed me most about that weekend was how these women spoke and how they conducted themselves. And I wanted that was something that I wanted to have also, that inner peace, that and that ability to be in the moment was very evident during that conference. And so Sensei mentioned to me that he wanted to start this project where we researched women ancestors. He had just come from his third Ango in Atlanta, and one of the things that he did was to chant the ancestors, the men and women. And he said he didn't know a lot about the women. And so he wanted this project, and I was very excited about it. So when I talk to people about it, lots of times through email, they say to me, well, that's all been done before. That's about 10, 15, 20 years ago, people started researching the women in Buddhism. And that's all been done before. But I hadn't done it, and I didn't know. And so here I am. And so we started researching these, and we bought a lot of texts, and we went online. And so every month we would meet once a month on Zoom, and the collaborators we would get together, and we would talk about the women that we were researching, the things that we were learning, are the feelings that came up in us about these women. And it's just amazing that the stories of these women 2,500 years ago are the same stories that we experience today in our everyday life. And then one of the women at one of those Zoom meetings, she was a little upset. She was a little irritated. And she said, you know, sometimes there's just one little line about these women. And it's all about the monks. It's all about the fathers. It's all about the families. It's all about the brothers. And so we had a template that we were working on. The template consisted of the name of the woman, her teacher, the era that she lived in, the country she was from, and then we would put a biography. And then after that, we would put her contributions. And as a result of this discussion, we switched the template around, and we started with the woman's contribution. What was the woman? What was she really like? What was it about the woman that we really wanted to know? And sometimes it was only a poem that was attributed to her through the Therigatha. The Therigatha is a book of the historical Buddhist women's poems. And sometimes that was it. It was her poem and who her family was. But in other texts, in some ancestors, there was quite a lot of information. And one of the interesting things is when you go into, different authors use different translations, and there's different interpretations of the same translation. And so we got to see other people's views of these women's lives and their contributions. And we got to discuss how we felt about that, or what view we liked the best, or, so it's been a very energizing and a deep learning for us. I have to admit, June hit after the pandemic and we all sort of scattered. But as the fall energy has come, we're coming back together again. So, we focused on the historical ancestors, women ancestors. We are now moving into Chinese and the Japanese women. And, but I have to say it was a really gift to learn about the women who lived at the time of Buddha, who walked with the Buddha, who listened to the Buddha, exchanged ideas with the Buddha, who, had teachings, individual teachings from him. It's really been a gift to be a part of that. And so I do want to mention one woman, that Mahapajapati, because without Mahapajapati, I wouldn't be here, and you may not be here, because I've come to understand what an important force she was in early Buddhism. She gathered her women together. She went and asked the Buddha to be able to listen to his teachings. She didn't move until she got the okay. She took care of the women that came to her. She saw that the women were taken care of. And she saw that everyone was taken care of. because that's what mothers do. We take care of everyone. And so I want to tell one story. Might be going over one story since I said I could tell one story. So this was very moving. This is in Wendy Garling's, I don't know if I have it here. This is in Wendy Garling's book, The Woman Who Raised the Buddha, The Extraordinary Life of Mahapajapati. And in this book, there is a whole chapter. It's called The Robe Story. And so I will not be able to do it justice because Wendy Garling really goes into depth with this story. So I hope you can read it at some time. But it starts with the Buddha leaves home, Siddhartha leaves home. And Mahapajapati, who has raised Siddhartha, is bereft with grief. She's beside herself with grief. He's now estranged from her. She doesn't know where he is, what he's doing, and she's full of grief. And so to transmute this grief, she decides to make him a robe for when he returns. And so she plants the seeds to the cotton, she grows the cotton. She spins the cotton, she weaves the cotton. And as she's doing these things, people are saying to her, why are you doing this? This is lowly work. You are queen, you shouldn't be doing this. And she wove this beautiful golden cloth, which she wanted to present to the Buddha when he came home. When her son returned home, she was going to give him this exquisite gift that transmuted her unconditional love for him and the grief that she felt with him going away and leaving her. So the Buddha returns and she goes to present him this exquisite gift, and he refuses it. He says to her, don't give it to me, give it to the Sangha. And she is so upset. So the Buddha is teaching her that he is no longer Siddhartha. He is the Buddha. And the unconditional love that she has for him has to be transferred to the greater Sangha and to the world. So she goes to him, but she goes to him again a second time to ask him, please receive my gift. He refuses her gift. So she goes a third time, please receive my gift. He refuses her gift. No, give it to the Sangha. So she goes and she gives it to, she tries to give it to Ananda, other leaders of the Sangha, and they refuse. And so a lowly monk, someone that nobody knows, a lowly monk has compassion for her and stands up and says, I will receive the cloth. So she gives the monk the cloth, and she's thinking, I am not worth much. Only a lonely monk will accept my gift. So the lowly monk accepts the gift, and the story goes, Buddha throws his bowl up into the air, and the bowl comes down and lands in the gift's hand, in the lowly monk's hands. So he, at some other reincarnation, is going to be a Buddha. So the robe that Mahakashapa is keeper of, the bowl and the robe for the next Buddha, this is the robe, the cloth that Mahapajapati wove, goes with the bowl. So the sacred feminine and mother's unconditional love go to the next Buddha. Then, in time and space, throughout time and space, the sacred feminine goes with the Buddha. Gasho. And now my teacher, Sensei Sangaku, will show you how this teaching tool, how he envisions this is going to work, because this research project is really for a teaching tool. So Sangaku, please.
Gasho Mokuo, thank you very much. Mokuo is the practice leader of the Falmouth Soto Zen Sangha, having taken on that responsibility in February. She was also Tenzo, and now Ikuse, who's also on, as well as Okashi, have become the Tenzo team. So we're now 4 strong in terms of our Sangha leadership, and I'm appreciative to all 3 of the people that are here and support what we do. Just a couple of things about the Falmouth Soto Zen Sangha that I have been observing over the last 11 years as we have been developing, and that is we seem to be working with 3 conditions on Cape Cod that are forming our outreach and our practice path for our Sangha. The first that became apparent was that we were in an area where recovery from alcohol and drug abuse was very, very strong. So members of the community that we gravitated to and gravitated to us had backgrounds in that type of need, the need for assistance, and we found ourselves being very open to working with those folks who wanted to work with us. Secondly, is that Falmouth is a retirement area for many, and the second large group was older people. So we found the Sangha also going in and assisting with the senior center, as well as assisting with recovery programs at halfway houses and others that have asked us to help them learn Zazen. It also became apparent 4 years ago when we started looking at the hidden lamp, 3 years ago that we started looking at the hidden lamp, that there was a big dearth. There was a dearth of information about women ancestors. And our Sangha currently is 50% women and 50% men, which is interesting. But the point being that I felt it important after my training, after my Ango, after going into Shuso and then into Shiho ceremony, that we enable more information to be shared about men and women. Sinjin pointed out last night that when we start studying the male ancestors, we realize we know very little about most of them. When we start studying the women ancestors, we realize we know even little or even less about them. So this is, I see, as an important aspect of our practice path to make this information known, to point these things out. And I'll begin by quoting what Taiyin Roshi said in his book. Do we need another book about Zen? Do we need another database about women's ancestors? Well, to both of those questions, the answer is, you betcha. Absolutely. You darn tootin'. Damn right we do. So these things are not any good unless they are used, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So I'm going to begin by letting you take a look at the vehicle, the app that we've decided to use And I'm going to go through this in some detail. So, and I'm also going to have to get rid of some of you because I want to see the screen. So as you look at my cursor, what you will see is a Keshimaku, or it is a distribution of women ancestors in an enzo, or in a circle. Now just take that in for a moment. Obviously, the name of the project down at the left is who is doing the project, and up around beginning at about 1 minute after midnight on the clock is Mahapajapati. Then going in sequence around are those women who came after her as our ancestors. Now we say ancestors rather than lineage holders, because with the possible exception of Prajnanata, who was the teacher of Bodhidharma, current understanding is that all of these were men. That is the passing down officially of the robe and bowl, as was noted in the story Mokuo read. But the point here is, at the same time, beginning very early in Buddha's teaching, women flocked to him as a primary result, although there were others who came outside of the influence of Mahapajapati to become part of his following. In the beginning, these women were camp followers, not in a derogatory sense, but they simply came and were on the outside listening to what was being said. It was later, after Mahapajapati encouraged Ananda and Siddhartha Gautama Buddha to let them get closer. So you can imagine them coming closer and closer and closer to the table, closer and closer and closer to the fire, closer and closer and closer to the teachings of the Buddha. So this is representative of that. If you look over to the right, you'll see an analysis, or simply talking about the Women's Ancestor Project. So if you will bear with me, the mission is to collaborate research the women ancestors of the Silent Thunder Order by creating a document that provides a brief biography, writing, and contributions of each to honor these women in our order. Our vision is to provide a written document to honor the lives and contributions of Buddhist women ancestors of our order, to be used as teaching for all practitioners. Now, this is a teaching tool. It is not something to be on the shelf, and I'll show you in a minute how this works. But let me go down to points 1, 2, and 3 to help us understand this a little bit better. Beginning next year, all people in our Sangha will have access to this document. Among other things, they can go in and add comments to what is already there. And in so doing, we can build an understanding of each of our women ancestors relative to what new books are coming out, what new research is being done, but have it in one place where we all can see it. So this will become part of everything from Jukai to Shiho, as far as we are concerned. Second, we will look later to combine the men and women ancestor Enzo, and I'll go back and check my spelling to see who were alive during the same period. In other words, we want to look at this overlap of men and women at a particular period of time. We will look into the teachings of men and women of the same era to explore similarities and differences of their teaching. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that when we do this, we have some peculiar possibilities that arise. For example, when we look at the different possibilities, we can come up with something like this. So what you have here is a section of the Enzo. Now, what's interesting about this section is that 20 of these women, and the blue ones with their names means we have done research. There's 62 women ancestors that we're looking into. And right now we're about a third of the way through. So where you see the white spaces, we simply haven't added information. But we do know, for example, that about the first 18 or so lived during the time of Buddha, Mahakashapa, and Ananda. Some of these women, therefore, became what is known in foundership and founding of anything as the last remaining people who knew the founder, who knew Sakyamuni Buddha. Now let that sink in for a minute. If you look at this particular group, in a way, we know there are more women that we now have some information on than the men on the other side, because on the male side, it was primarily those that received transmission, where on the women's side, there was not transmission in that way, although some were identified as the best by Buddha in terms of their knowledge and understanding. So this one particular idea of how we can begin to segue. Now imagine coming over here on this side are the male ancestors coming on this inside, and that we can look at who was doing what with whom at the time. So here, for example, we have Mahapajnapati and Yasodhana, the stepmother and the daughter-in-law of Sakyamuni Buddha, which creates a very interesting combination of things that we should know. That is, that from the very beginning, these things were interfamilial. They also had different castes that were involved. And as a result of that, we begin building, although slowly, the construct of equanimity. Now, just want to show you a few things about this. As we go into any of the women ancestors, over here on the right, you see the person who did the research, who brought it together, and who provided the information. And this information, we have all of the various sources that are important to the understanding of the information. For example, Mokuo mentioned going back to some of the verses in the Therigatha, looking at the different women and their contributions. So we have that capability to do that also. And I'm losing some of my ability here because of the way this is set up, so bear with me. And one of the things that if we look at the expansive capability, we can find something like going back to Kazan. Kazan wrote the book called The Book of the Lamp, where he looked at 52 lineage holders and did a similar kind of biographical pitch. Hence, with the Moon book, with the Hidden Lamp, the title of that was The Hidden Lamp rather than the lamp itself, pointing out that the interrelationship between the two is much more than we have been reporting out on, particularly when we talk about quote unquote ancestors, meaning both in lineage and those women who were not recognized as such until much closer to the 19th century, 18th century. So as we know, if we go back and look at Kazan, he talks about his mother who had 2 temples, and back to his grandmother who was a follower of Dogen. So we don't generally know that. We have a tendency more to know what would be called some pithy things about women in relationship to men ancestors. We tell the story of Dogen's mother dying and his seeing the incense, which brought him into a certain awareness of the meaning of impermanence and transistence. So we can go into a variety of looking at the relationship between Buhaku Ninis, that is the women, and the Buhakas who were men. So we've cross-referenced a lot of information, and in doing so, we can continue to expand this possibility. So I could go on in detail here, but I want to go to one other thing, and that is when we get down to looking at the information shared by different people, whether it's Mokuo, Kuo-san, Maya Sho, Amy, or others, at the bottom, they have their personal response. That is, commentaries on having read about these women and looking at them in some depth, they can give their own response to what this means. Now, in speaking with Amy-san the other day, she said, you know, since I did my first commentary on one of the women ancestors, I find that now I am much more aware of them, so I want to do another one. So what we're going to begin next year is once everyone reads this information, they can put in their own commentary. You can go back and add commentary. So what we will then have is not only the information about women ancestors, but the commentary by different members of our Sangha who have gone in and looked at this. So it becomes a wealth of information and a body of knowledge for our Sangha itself. Now, we want all of you in the Silent Thunder Order to join us if you wish. You may get in touch with Mokuo, and her email is attached, and we'd be glad to talk to you about it. One of the things we'd like to do actually is later on, I'm not sure if we could do it by Founders Month, but maybe by the 1st of December, to simply have an open meeting where anyone can come and join us as we talk about this in some detail. So there are 4 or 5 of us, 4 of us on the talk today who can also talk to the evolution. Again, not wanting to get too preoccupied with the technology of this, but we have the capability of looking at who did what. For example, here are the ones that Amy did. Here are the ones that Julie did. Kuo-san. I have to get rid of these to go to the next one. My apology. And as a result of that, we can look at who did what. We can also look at such interesting things as relationships between the different aspects of the ancestors. For example, we can look at Mahakashaspa and Yasodhana as relatives. We can trace this throughout. So we have a lot of different ways in which we can activate this, all going back to the fact that it is interactive, has a great deal of capability. And I would add something that that Zenku said last night in listening to the talk by Senchen, is that rather than the paramita vajanta, which means vibrancy, enthusiasm. This is rather fun. We get to not only learn, but play with technology. In other words, we are transitioning, as all of the members of the Sangha did, from speaking only to the written word. Now we're going from the written word to the hyperlinked word, and it becomes quite an interesting phenomenon. So I have to end before we begin our discussion with all of you. In my thanks to Mokuo and to Amy and to Julie and to Kuo-san and to Maya Sho, and I left somebody out, So it's for everyone who's
Good.
participated in this discussion. And as a result of this, we are now publicly announcing this. We will continue to work on it. This will be one of the 3 outreaches of our Sangha Women's Ancestors, Aging Zen, and outreach to the recovery community. So with that, I will turn it back over to Cosette because we're now ready to take questions, Mokuo, and then I'll be available also if you have any questions. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you for that. I would like to open it for questions now. I've got it on gallery view for myself, so I can see if you raise your hand or if you aren't being recognized, please unmute and speak out. But I see first hand up is Mission Mountain Zen.
Very nice presentation. Thank you so much, both of you. I can see this being very, very valuable. I have a couple of questions. I guess the first thing I wanted to know is, we have within Soto Zen Buddhism kind of, let's say, kind of recognized a set of women ancestors that we have in our lineage chant for them, our ancestors chant, women's ancestors. And I'm assuming that perhaps that was your starting point, but I'm wondering if, are you going to go beyond that and just keep expanding to all the other women that you wind up finding out about through this research and incorporating that to some degree? What is your overall thinking? Or are you pretty much primarily focused on the set of ancestors that we've kind of agreed upon, that these are our main ancestors?
Mokuo?
Well, for right now, we're focusing on our main ancestors. And I would love to continue it after, expand it. I just wanted to also mention that this technology tool that we're developing is going to be available to whoever wants it. I just wanted to make that clear, please. Yeah.
To follow up on your point, Zenku, we're doing what's called secondary research. That is, we're doing more in-depth research on research that's been done. So we're looking at 62 women ancestors coming out of the Soto Zen Buddhist project of about 5-6 years ago, maybe 7 now, where they identified Soto Zen tradition, ancestral tradition for theorists. And so this is our primary.
Great.
Kushin?
Yes, again, just grateful, deep bows for your extraordinary work. In the spring of 2020, and you probably have seen some of this, Apaya did a whole practice session on women ancestors, and I was able to participate, and I just, day after day, I just got filled with the richness of not only the ancestors, but the women who were presenting, as you spoke of, Mokuo. And I'm wondering if you hope to engage our modern era women leadership, because again, the extraordinary work that was being presented from young to old and everything in between just blew my mind. And not that I was surprised that it existed, but that I too had not really found a resource to understand the lineage of our women ancestors, and was just, I think my notes ended up being about this deep after that session. And I still feel like I have so much to understand. So again, I'm delighted with what you're doing. I hope I can somehow join in and learn more, but deep bows to the work there. But maybe you could speak about the modern era, and if you've even talked about that in this large project. Gasho.
Well, that is something that that I'm trying to do. Yeah, I have reached out to some, and I think that that's an important part of the project, becoming familiar with the contemporary practitioners. Yes.
I just to echo what Mokuo just said, that is true as well, but we also know our limitations in terms of resources. So we think we have a good project that will be very beneficial to our training to practice path. And we wish to move with that. And we expect to attract other people. We're just not going public with it. And as a result of this, we will see where that leads. Several years ago, Hojo, you may remember the time when James Ishmael Ford wrote a Zen Master Who, where he went and tried to identify transmitted priests and some lineage information that was quite an informative book because it brought out several things. At the same time now, because there's new research being done, as new research appears, we can simply add it into this database. What we don't have categorically right now that we can find is kind of a set of information about contemporary women priests. It's within the Soto Zen Buddhist Association, but again, that's not all, but it's limited. So we don't want to overstep right now. We think we have a lot to do. More resources come in, we'll look at the possibilities. Gotcha. Who was on?
I think I was rubbing my nose, but thank you.
Oh, any movement above the shoulder is a raising of the hand.
Thank you so much for the beautiful presentation, and I look forward for the continued collaboration and investigation and wonderful things we're going to discover together. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other question? I think while people are, to give you a chance to think of any questions, I just want to let everybody know that Mokuo put together a nice list of resources, in terms of contemporary books, to read. And that list is both on the retreat webpage. I also posted it in the chat channel. So there's a lot of resources there if you want to, dive into it further. Katsuri.
Morning, and thank you for the presentations, both of Mokuo and Sensei. And I do feel I really resonated, Mokuo, with when you talked about one of the major problems here is invisibility. We just haven't read or thought or considered women. And I've read some of the poems from the Therigatha, and it's quite moving. And I do recommend, I think Susan Moon may have a translation of that as well. A modern translation, recent modern translation has been wonderful. I just want to say something about something that you said, Sensei, that may have gotten, that I want to emphasize or come back to, might have gotten lost in the, like when you said, you talked about the purpose of the chart and understanding this as building of equanimity. I really responded to that. That's the goal here, trying to take in these people that we haven't taken in and try to understand them, listen to what they taught. And it does go right back to the Buddha. And they have been a part of our history that has been ignored. So thank you all very much. Thank you both.
Ikusei.
Good morning. I am literally thrilled that one of the first things that got mentioned was the concept of the sacred feminine, and to say merely that I think many of the problems of the world have to do with a lack or with a in the distant past, there was apparently more respect for this concept of the sacred feminine, and that it is all to our loss that this de-emphasis has continued. And so I can almost say I feel the earth rejoice that we are going to have to bring more of that to the light. Like Persephone, it's been kept in the dark for way too long.
Gotcha. I wonder if Amy would like to say something.
Morning, Joe. What a beautiful presentation. Thank you both so much. I can't say enough about what it is like to research Ancestor as opposed to just presented with information about her. That how exciting it is to follow the trail and to discover a whole sutra attributed to a woman ancestor, for example, it's so the process itself and the information that I received from that process so meaningful, and I encourage anyone who is interested to try it. I'm so struck by the story, Mokuo, that you shared about the robe, and given the paramitas that we discussed last, and Donna Paramita, her generosity and his pain, the pain of his teaching to her, how incredibly painful that must have been, and he was witnessing her suffering. And this is one who also accepted, and Mokuo, I think you something last night discussion about the generosity of letting others give to us as a form of generosity. And so is this story about a man who accepted meat that was bad from another in an act of generosity too. And so I'm very struck by all these things in this story. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
Hojo's hand is up.
Yeah, I just briefly, I wanted to say that I appreciate the project and the effort going into it. I don't think it matters so much that there's not a lot of information historically about these folks any more than it does the men in the lineage. The historicity is less important in Zen because each of the current practitioners is charged with developing the same understanding and developing the same insight. And this is considered to be not just a conceptual idea, but a tangible reality. And so rather like the saints of Catholicism who claim personal epiphany, personal experience, and Joan of Arc was burned at the stake for it, it didn't always turn out well, but I think our ancestors are more like that. They, in fact, if they did not have personal experience, they were kind of a charlatan or phony. And Dogen criticized some priests in some of the lineages for that. And Matsuoka criticized current priests for not really living up to this. So in doing the research and writing conclusions, findings, conclusions, recommendations, as is normal, as follow through in research, I think it's more important that we understand the lessons from these ancestors with the paucity of information that we have, and how we can apply those lessons to our daily life and expand the message beyond the limited information we have, to make it relevant to our time. And I can't think of anything more relevant than basing women's studies on the premise in Hutsubraishin, Hutsubraishin, Establishing Bodhi Mind, which was a fascicle of Dogen, in which he, I may be confusing it with Prostration to the Attainment of the Marrow. One of those was about the kind of misogyny that existed in Japan of his time. They had temples that only men could attend, etc. And he was criticizing all of this and making the point that if a 7-year-old girl is a Dharma holder, we make prostrations to her. She's a Dharma holder. And his insistence that they even had beliefs, or I don't know if you call it belief, but memes, if you will, that a woman had to be reborn as a man to be able to become enlightened and so forth. There were some pretty horrific ideas floating around, and prior to Japan too, and back to India. So Dogen was insistent on this premise that Buddha nature is not gendered. And so it can't be sorted out into categories such as gender, race, ethnicity, etc. It's just not the way it is. And Paula Arai is one of the references I recommended to this group, I believe, when I was asked. She did a lot of study on Dogen's nuns. And in 2000, when we had the conference at Emory, she presented a wonderful presentation on Dogen's nuns, and down to the present day, when in World War II, around 1945, at the end of, Randy, you want to turn your mic off? At the end of the war, when the bombs were being dropped, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and so forth, this famous nun carried this motion to the parliament of Sotoshu that they recognize all current nuns as co-equal to the monks, and that they should be allowed to have their own students, their own, etc., head of temples. How much of that was implemented after the war, is questionable. But the parliament agreed. The parliament passed the motion. Why, what their motives were, the world was crumbling around them. Who knows? But on the basis of this fascicle of Dogen from the 13th century, these nuns made their case. Because if the entire establishment is based on Dogen, and you have this testimony from Dogen, nobody can refute that testimony. Nobody can say, no, Dogen's wrong. He got it wrong, So if you look at our times, redux, deja vu. So we have a similar situation, and it's one of the many immigration. Look at all the different ones. You can see that the Buddhist approach to all of this would be very different, not divisive, looking for unification, inclusiveness, not exclusiveness, etc. So I think this is a very good project, and it's one of many that I think the Zen Center of the future would represent. And those are the kind of things my talk will be about Saturday night.
Nice. Gotcha.
Mokuo, would you like to kind of wrap up, and I'll try to wrap up your wrap up.
Okay. To Hojo's point, I understand that fascicle that Dogen wrote. But I also understand that the misogyny has gone on for a long time. So much so, as I said, you know, unconsciously, for myself at my age, unconsciously, I have internalized that. And so, you know, being able to, for the researchers and translators to delve into the ancient writings and to be able to bring it alive, the women alive, you know, dig it out, has meant a lot to me. And I understand, you know, equanimity. But it's been really wonderful to be able to, as Amy said, research these women and live with them. And with our personal responses to our research, we respond to how they have affected our lives, how this women that we have gotten to know and lived with and carried with us, how it has affected our thinking, our behavior. And so I do want to say, if anyone wants to join us, please do. And this will be available once we get it done. But it's a living thing. So it will always be growing. Thank you.
Sure. I'd just like to pick up on what Hojo said last night when he talked about what was history. What is history? History is not necessarily true. It's simply what has been recorded and people agreed to in some way, shape, or fashion. So I think the Dharma is always expanding. The past is always expanding as new light is shown on it. And I think what we hope to do with the project is continue to show light on two things. One is the contributions of women ancestors from, you know, research on research. But the other one, I think, is to look at that time and space where they both were together, men and women. And, you know, what do we know about that? What are we finding out about that? What was the relationship between Dogen and Keisan's grandmother, for example, is an interesting topic. That aside, however, it is simply part of our understanding of where we came from and how we arrived. What we do with it now, of course, is the result of all of this. So hopefully it'll be something of interest and something that others can use in their sharing of the Dharma and in teaching. So again, Gasho,
Thank
to
you.
all of you for being here this morning.